Please welcome to the stage Joy Robbins, Global Chief Advertising Officer of The New York Times, and Ian Colley, Chief Marketing Officer at The Trade Desk.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joy, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I hope your trip here this morning wasn't too taxing.
Thank you for making it so convenient.
I do have a question. Before we get into this, I have a question for you. A bit of a silly question. So my wife just discovered Wordle. And by the way, I think my wife is watching the live stream. So my wife just discovered Wordle. She thinks she's a Wordle champion, right? So on the weekends, she'll challenge me, open your phone, we'll do it together, we'll see who gets it done fastest. But the question is this. I think the key to winning Wordle is solving the puzzle in the shortest amount of time using all 6 guesses. She says the key to winning Wordle is solving the puzzle using the fewest guesses, no matter how long it takes. Now, as the Chief Advertising Officer of the New York Times, I assume you sit on the Rules Committee for Wordle. Before you answer, I just want to let you know that the power dynamics of my marriage are resting on your answer to this question.
I really hope they are, because your wife is right.
Oh, no. Really?
I mean, like, if you want to think about how to really make it challenging, it's a combination of both. Okay. Utilizing the fewest amount of guesses in the shortest amount of time.
Okay.
What's your first word that you always use?
My first word is always spare. S-P-A-R-E.
Okay.
What about you?
Arise.
Well, that's good. Yeah. 3 vowels. I like that. Okay. All right. I'm going to
try that. I'm going to try that
today when I challenge my wife when I get home tonight. But this is actually a good segue, because the New York Times has expanded so much in recent years. It's not just the newspaper and journalism anymore. Yeah. So how do you, as the Chief Advertising Officer, think about the expansion that you've gone through over the last few years?
I mean, I think you bring up an important and I hope obvious point to everybody in this room, that the greatest level of transformation of the New York Times across the last dozen years is we've gone from a newspaper to a thriving digital-first media company. And I think the expansion that you're talking about that has influenced our purchase of Wordle, our acquisition of The Athletic, our investments in Wirecutter and in New York Times Cooking, is really a reflection of the essential subscription strategy that we launched just about 3 years ago in 2022. And the sort of pillars of that strategy are, 1, to be the best news destination in the world. And by news, I don't just mean, breaking news and politics. I mean fashion and culinary and sports and, all of the things that kind of fit into the umbrella of news. So that's 1. The second is to be more valuable to people as they explore and engage with their lives and their passions. And so that, again, includes, what to cook for dinner, what to buy, what Premier League sports team you may be following. And the third is to really create an expansive and connected product that really helps people engage with the best of what the New York Times has to offer. And so that essential subscription strategy is really to be the essential subscription for every curious person seeking to understand and engage with the world. And so that ultimately means that we have to go after giant spaces to help people find reasons to come into the New York Times to ultimately become a subscriber.
And as Chief Advertising Officer, I'm sure you have a say in this expansion, but how do you think about what all this means in terms of how you deliver value to the world's biggest advertisers who are in the room today?
It's interesting. People ask me what it feels like to be the Chief Advertising Officer in a company that describes itself as subscription first. And what I would say is it's actually our biggest superpower. We are the most subscribed to journalism company. We have almost 11.5 million subscribers. And what that means is, first and foremost, we are obsessed with creating products that people are going to pay for. And what that means is that we obsess about the experience, about the journalism, and how that benefits our advertising partners is we're really thinking about what the experience of even advertising looks like on the New York Times. And that benefits advertisers because it tends to make ads perform better. We think about the most effective way to insert ads. For us, it's been our Flex suite, so these really big, beautiful canvases that also benefit from the enormous amount of signal and first-party data that we have, because we have 150 million registered users who are basically giving us their information. We're really able to use that to better target advertising. And lastly, it's the trust, right? I mean, people are subscribing to the New York Times. They're coming to us not just to read what might be happening in the world, but to decide what to buy, to decide, what to watch, to decide, what to cook for dinner for their family, to follow their favorite sports teams. So there's such a broad array of intent signals and different reasons people are coming in. We're really able to target based on, what might be the most important thing to somebody for the day to come in.
You talked there about first-party data.
Yeah.
So the more you expand, the more engaging these platforms are, the more they're going to subscribe, the more they're going to give you first-party data that you presumably then want to share with advertisers. So how are you thinking about the technology behind that?
Of course, yeah. So we were really early to adopt first-party data targeting. We actually stopped using third-party cookies far before, the threat of cookie deprecation was sort of thought to be a real thing. And that's because we have so much data on our audiences, and we really wanted to think about how to surface that in really privacy-forward ways. So what we see is that campaigns that leverage both our proprietary formats and our first-party data tend to perform, whether that be on click-through rate or brand perception or intent, far beyond the sort of industry norm. We're seeing click-through rates above 0.5% pretty regularly. So that's one way that we've really been able to leverage that data. What we've recently done is also think about how technology can enable even more powerful targeting capabilities. So last year, we launched a technology called Brand Match that leverages generative AI to actually create almost personalized segments for brands based on their brief. And so what it really does is it translates the essence of a brand's brief. So for instance, a brand like Cartier and a brand like Chanel, when you're looking at the type of audiences, whether it's contextual or even first-party targeting, they look really similar. But if you ask Cartier and Chanel, they have very different audiences. They have very different characteristics. And so we really are able to take those characteristics, feed it into Brand Match, and it both comes up with unique targeting as well as unique audience pools that these advertisers can go after. And what we've seen that lead to is, in addition to these really powerful first-party data segments, when you're leveraging Brand Match, you're seeing anything from like a 3 to 4x performance on these campaigns. So it's just been a really exciting new technology to launch in the spirit of targeting.
Yeah, and I know you've been an early adopter of UID2, which for us certainly helps us take advantage of those kinds of things. You talked about the subscription model, but you're also the chief advertising officer, and you've also embraced programmatic.
Yeah.
So how does programmatic fit into the suite of ways that you think about advertising?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I got here just about 2 years ago, I think actually we hadn't really seen programmatic as a really strategic mechanism for our business. I think if you think about the reason that the New York Times creates such direct relationships with our audiences is we really want to be able to control and make sure people are coming to us directly to have relationships with us so they ultimately subscribe. We also recognize in that subscription model that we also have to think about putting our content where people are, really being where our audiences need us to be. And what I saw was the opportunity to think about that similar to how we approach programmatic. Of course, we're going to prioritize direct relationships with advertisers, but it doesn't mean that we have to do it in spite or against programmatic. And so we've really integrated programmatic into a strategic position of our business because we recognize that this is where our buyers and agencies and marketers really are. So how can we partner with folks like the Trade Desk to really think about how we can surface the most important signals of our audiences to our buyers, and we've really collaborated so nicely with you all to do that vis-a-vis UID2 this year.
And I know demand on our platform for the New York Times has increased double digits in recent months because of those kinds of innovations around things like viewability, ad experience, identity, first-party data. So thank you for that partnership.
Yeah, thank you.
I do want to touch on an issue we spent a lot of time talking about last year, which is the role of journalism. in the advertising environment, because there are still some brands probably who think about journalism and say that's a bit too scary for me.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of research in the last year or so that's taken place that looks at kind of consumer response to ads that are associated with journalism and news.
Yeah.
And I know you're involved in that, we're involved in that too, but perhaps you'd just like to share some of that data that might be useful to folks in the audience here.
Yeah, this is a place I'm really passionate about. And I'm not going to say everyone has to advertise in news because it's so important to our democracy, because I don't think that that is compelling enough to this audience. What you care about is how to drive your business. And what we've seen is that news is a powerful place to reach curious, engaged audiences that ultimately create outcomes for business. And so we've done a lot of our own research at the New York Times to demonstrate that running in news has no impact on brand affinity or consideration. And in fact, we've seen it have a positive impact. I recognize that, marketers can be very sensitive to making sure that they are running in brand suitable places. And I think that that's been a, core to our business for a long time. We've always adopted sort of the disaster targeting and making sure that advertisers aren't running in any type of tragedy. But also we've adopted a lot of technology to make sure that there are keywords that we can make sure that are not part of advertisers' campaigns. But the latest study that I know you're referring to is Stagwell's Future of News initiative, where they also, so it's not even our research, it's research they did that demonstrated and reinforced that running in news, and actually even in breaking news and news that could be categorized as disaster, has little to no impact on brand favorability. And so what I think is important for this room to take away is, one, that we've proved this over and over again, but news is also not monolithic. I think that's why I talked about in the beginning of yes, our part of our strategy is to be the world's best news destination. And it doesn't just mean politics or war or breaking news. News is really, really dimensional. And whether it's the New York Times or any other publisher who is categorized as news, it is sports, it is lifestyle, it is so much broader than that. And so, when we think about how we work with advertisers and, recognizing that there are different, abilities to imagine themselves being in news, we kind of think of it in three ways. And we think of those who have really embraced running with news publishers because they've seen the impact that it can have on their businesses and their outcomes. We see advertisers who are also in the category of, I want to run in news environments, but I want to stay away from breaking news or politics. And then we call it the never newsers. And what we hope we can really help drive within the industry is to just allow the never newsers to take a step in the direction of recognizing that just because you might run with a news publisher doesn't mean that you have to run in some of the places that may concern with brand suitability. Because the reality is, for the New York Times, we have such an enormous audience coming in to play games. We have tens of millions of people coming in, like you and your wife, every week.
Don't remind me.
To just for games, or to read about their favorite sports teams and sports leagues, or to figure out what to cook for dinner. That is an enormous, enormous amount of why people are using the New York Times. But we also recognize that engaged audience across the news part of the portfolio is really valuable and has a great impact. So I think really considering if you're looking to make an impact for your business, I think really kind of thinking more about how you're leveraging those platforms is really helpful.
Great. We have one final question that we're going to end each session with, and you're coming off a record year with the New York Times. So a lot of the things you're talking about are clearly working. You occupy an incredibly vaunted space in the premium open internet.
Yeah.
So what are you focusing on this year? How are you going to top that?
Yeah. I will give you two things. Our CEO, Meredith Kopit-Levien, talked about, 2025 really being a year where we focus on building our engaged audience, making sure that we are a direct destination for people to come in daily. And so what that means is our opportunity as we build out some of the products and things that will drive this daily habit, it means that we have opportunities to introduce even more supply, differentiated supply, things that are video and increased audio and multimedia formats, and making sure that those really work hard for advertisers. So one is just innovating on the formats and the technologies that we offer for our partners to use. The second is really focusing on measurement and being able to demonstrate outcomes. When we think about this essential subscription strategy, if we're going to be essential in people's lives, what I also want to make sure is that we are essential to our brand and agency partners' media plans. And so everything that we can do to help drive that is ultimately our main focus.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the building long trip to be with us. Thank you for leaning into programmatic and making your content addressable for everybody here in the audience. I'm not going to thank you for everything I'm going to have to endure when I get home tonight.
Yeah,
but otherwise,
I'm going to say you're welcome to your wife.
All right, of course. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.